How you doing? My wife told me I had to lose the sunglasses because she thought it made me look like a hoodlum, a mafioso or something. So I got rid of those. But wanted to chat for just a second today about rent. What could be more exciting than rent? Well, um, it's not necessarily exciting, but the package of rent that uh, tenants have to pay can be surprising. My father used to have a sign on his desk. It said no surprises, but in real estate or in life generally, I don't know how you avoid them, but you want to minimize them if you're a tenant or an advocate broker for a tenant by showing as much as possible what's really going to be paid if you were a tenant looking at space. Well, the landlord will say, well, the rent is, they usually quote by price per square foot. The rent is 15 or whatever it is. And is that the rent? Well, is that the average rent? Is it the rent plus net charges? Is it the rent plus charges for the landlord work as amortized? Is it the rent? Is it what the tenant has to pay himself back if he does or she does work? Does it include parking? I think rather than even using the word rent, it'd be a good idea to just talk about, if you're talking about the tenant occupant, is costs of occupancy. So what I try to do here in this little sheet is to take quoted rent and then just talk about it a little bit and add in the factors that someone might possibly also have to pay. Strangely enough, those things in your lease will be called additional rent. But in addition to additional rent, there will be amortized costs. But let's start off with, let's say, how big is the space? That also can be surprising too. The landlord developers often talk about rentable square feet. Well, if you look at your space, you might find that the rentable is not the same as the usable. They have something called load factor, which especially in offices, but sometimes also in retail areas, it's the blending in proratedly of the common space, elevators, corridors, etc., bathrooms and stuff. And there's nothing the matter with that, but when people are planning their space, they may find they don't have as much to work with within their walls. So you want to make that adjustment. And you might also want to make a calculation as to the rentable versus the usable on your spreadsheet. But anyhow, so let's say the rent is, in this case, let's say it's 2 years at a 5-year lease, 2 years at $9, 2 years at $10 per square foot, 1 year at $12 per square foot. We'll multiply that. Okay, what else is there involved in this? Well, in what they call a net lease, you want to add in the cost per square foot based upon the division into rentable or usable respectively for real estate taxes, real estate related liability insurance. The tenant would have to have personal insurance on its contents and its business insurance in addition, but that's stipulated in a lease but not part of the payment to the landlord. You have interior cleaning, and that can be a big number. Gas, electric, maybe sometimes water also. And parking. Parking can be in the rent totally. It can be from one lot in one part of town or another lot where the cost can vary. In our area, Buffalo, New York, it can be $50 to $200 a square foot, say, per parking space. So those should be multiplied out times the number of parking spaces that the tenant would like to have. And you can say, well, all right, the people in this office perhaps might also be paying their own parking, but that relates to their ability to attract customers, and I think it's more responsible to actually put in the cost of parking because let's say in a suburban site that may be zero for the tenant, that helps or not the ability to attract workers to your job force. But the landlord may do some work or a lot of work, turnkey even, but the tenant may have to do work too. So the cost of that tenant work should also be amortized over the course of the lease. So in our example here, I put in $20,000. That would be not related to the personal property of the tenant, but it'd be the real estate work. And then even in some cases, you may have to pay the unscrupulous broker if you're a tenant. And so there should be an estimate for that in there too, and that should be amortized. These are real costs of occupancy again. So if you add the whatever tenant work or brokerage fee into that, you should use some type of interest rate and an amortization based upon the term of the lease, 60 months or 5 years. And in our example, that ends up to being $3.02 a square foot. The parking at 12 spaces for $75 per parking space, that's $4.32. That's not chicken feed. So anyhow, you add up that, taxes, insurance, and you put that together in tenant expenses. There also might also be, and almost any lease will stipulate, extra costs on top of a base. Now, if it's a net lease, the base will be small. It might be just for structural, for example. It might be a couple bucks, just estimatedly. But on a gross lease, if the tenant wasn't paying real estate taxes and things like that, the number can be, in our area, it can be $5 to $8 or $9 more per square foot, depending if there's an elevator in the building. So there will be some escalation factor after whatever agreed base year of the lease. So using, say, inflation at 2%, you should put something in for that. So that's the costs over the base year. So you would add up the nominal stipulated quoted rent per rentable square foot plus the tenant expenses plus the overages beyond a base. And in our example here, you can see what looked like a nice lease, cheap at $9 a square foot. When all these other costs and amortizations are put together, you're over $22 a square foot. Now, you have disparate cash flows when you as a broker or a tenant looking in the market is looking around at a whole bunch of spaces. So how do you evaluate these disparate cash flows, different rents, different amortizations, different additional rent items? I think the only valid way is to take the spread of the numbers, the gross numbers with all costs included, and calculate a present value of that based upon some reasonable cost of money. And then that would compare apples and oranges and artichokes on one even playing field. So this is just a rough and ready view of things, but I think it's too easy to be confused by nominal quoted rent unless you dig in and add up all of the extra costs of occupancy. And that's what I think we as brokers and you as tenant consumers have to do when you're out looking for space. So if any of this is interesting, you want to chat about it, my name's Stephen Hunt, H-U-N-T, Hunt Commercial Real Estate. My telephone is 716-444-0299, 716-444-0299. My email is shunt, strangely enough, shunt@huntcommercial.com, shunt@huntcommercial.com. Thank you for looking at this.